sustainable animal health solutions. And a driving principle at the base of our company is the econo-health principle, where for us it is key to think and contribute to solutions where we try to consider multiple diseases at once, and also especially where we put bigger emphasis on the economic and the social context of disease control and when giving animal health advices. And so what is important for us is by complementing the epidemiological triad, where we think about the host, the pathogen, and the environment, but to consider it and to widen it up to the socio-economic triad, where we still consider the disease agent, but where we think about managing the disease in a farm economic context and also considering social factors. So, for instance, social satisfaction of farmers or of veterinarians is very important if we want to make a difference and build resilient farms. And how we do that is by contributing to our research projects, R&D, but also by supporting research through coordination and collaboration, enhancing collaboration between different institutions. And finally, also by giving some training and workshops. So back to the epidemiology, and it's very for a long time I never showed life cycles anymore in my presentations, but now apparently I seem to have started doing it again. And this is a life cycle from my former boss, Professor Emeritus Joseph Verkraassen, on Ostertaria. Just to show, we're talking about cattle here, grazing cattle, that infect themselves while grazing with the free living stages of the nematodes. This will develop in the stomach or in the guts of the cow, and after 3 weeks they will have become adult and start producing eggs that again are developed in the environment. So very important for this parasite. There's always a phase in the animal, but there's also always a very important phase outside of the animal. The same, because we're also going to talk about liver fluke. So the same applies for liver fluke. And here I share some pictures from my recent stay in Austria 2 weeks ago during my annual holiday. And of course, so here you can see a great picture of the Wilden Kaiser viewed from St. Johann in Tyrol. And yes, when you are walking there, indeed, you can see that really this must be the heaven for liver fluke, because everywhere you see these lanes, you see footprints with water, you see, and you've also, I spent some time looking for the snails, and well, it didn't took me so long to find at least one snail. So yes, liver fluke is definitely also to be considered when thinking about parasites in this region. And there again, so we have the life cycle in the host, but also the life cycle outside the host. And of course, as we know, the important difference here is that there is the intermediate host via the nut snail. Now, looking at the epidemiology, this is the classical pattern that is in the textbooks and that we are used to talk about, is that for gastrointestinal nematodes, so there is a surviving larval population on the pasture. When animals are moved out on the pasture, they infect themselves with the surviving population. This will initiate the egg shedding, so deposition of new eggs on the pasture that will build up. And when these eggs start to develop, this will result in an increase of the larval population and the pasture contamination with the highest infection levels in the second part of the grazing season. The EPGs will more or less reach a summer peak, and then because of immunity, because animals are developing immunity, the EPGs are expected to drop to low levels towards the end of the grazing season. However, this is how it is in the textbooks, but we all know now that a lot of things are changing. We have the climate change and we have the climate disruption. We have changing husbandry practices. Farms are not managed today in the same way they were managed 20 years ago. We have anthelmintic resistance, and we have many other factors that can affect epidemiology. This is difficult. This leads to much more variation, and it's difficult to always understand how the epidemiology will change and in which circumstances. For that, a lot of research in the last years has been conducted in the modeling that can help us to understand if we change some factors in the management, in the climate, how will this affect the pasture contamination, how will this affect the expected fecal egg counts in the animals. And this is just an example from Belgium, a study conducted at Ghent University, where we visited farms across the different months. But actually, as you can see, there was not at all a clear summer peak, and rather the most of the high EPGs were observed towards the end of the second half of the grazing season, rather than in the middle, as we would normally have expected as it was before. The same here, another study conducted by Sindre Schave, also from Ghent University, and also here, so there were 7 farms monitored closely with monthly fecal egg counts being conducted. But what was observed that either the fecal egg counts stayed rather low during the whole grazing season, or if there is a peak, the peak was rather towards the end of the grazing season, and not also this summer peak as I showed in the textbook example. So again, clear indications that things have changed. Then another example of changing epidemiology is an output from this mathematical model that I was talking about. And here was an example that has been worked out using the glowworm FL model by my colleague Tom Wang, where he modeled expected pasture larval contamination in Belgium based on the meteorological conditions of 2 different years. 2020 was a very exceptional, very dry year with low rainfall, while 2021 was more normal or even with high rainfall. And you can see there was a dramatic difference in the expected pasture contamination, 3-fold difference almost between the 2 years. So again, all this the differences in weather circumstances have increased, and this will again lead to greater variation and greater differences between different years in the parasite levels. Then the same for liver fluke. This is work from University of Liverpool by Cyril Caminada. And also here he projected the expected climate. So he modeled different climate change scenarios using the MT index, which represents liver fluke infection risk. And you can see that under different, so every column represents a different climate change scenario, from the mildest change to the more severe change. And what is seen that also for liver fluke, for instance, depending on where you are in Europe, but overall, for instance, the transmission season will can be extended by up to 2 months. So it will start earlier and it will stop later in the year. That transmission is possible. However, in the south of Europe, actually, it will be, the transmission season will be changed in timing. So there will be a transmission opportunity in spring. In the summer, it's becoming too hot, and there's an extended transmission opportunity in autumn. But overall, things are changing. And of course, in the beginning, because the last slide, that was work from already 10 years ago, in the beginning, we were all talking about climate change, and we were imagining climate change as, okay, this is an increase in temperature. So, okay, just it is now, only it's a little bit hotter, or we just add a number of degrees. And that is how we imagine climate change. But actually, what is becoming clear now, that climate change is more also about more natural catastrophic events. So the question that we are should be addressed now more, and this was nicely addressed in this paper by Giovanni Poglaien, and is also what are the effects of catastrophic events like flooding, like a very short period with very high temperature, with fires, wood fires, and all these conditions. Are these also affecting parasites? Probably they are, but again, it's even more complex than just a gradual increase in temperature, and even more difficult to model. But it's clear that there are implications also for parasite infections. For instance, the link between flooding and pyoamphistome infections, or between flooding and liver fluke infections. So just this as an introduction, that of course I don't think I need to convince this audience, but epidemiology is changing, and we still need to we start to understand that. Still, we need to understand it better, but it is changing. What does it mean? Well, first of all, it means, can we still hold on to how we used to manage parasitic worm infections? So the traditional deworming routines, do they still hold? And of course, I guess you know the answer also. But this is how it used to be. So there were the strategic deworming schedules, and these are based on the fact that on two things. First, the prepatent period, for instance, of gastrointestinal nematodes, 3 weeks. So if we treat, for instance, with levamisole every 3 weeks, we are, in the beginning of the grazing season, we are preventing the egg shedding of the animals. And so the means that the traditional peak will be lowered, and as a result, also the pastoral contamination will stay at a low level, with as a result that at the end of the grazing season, the animals have not experienced an excessive infection, and so the infection is controlled. So this is what we consider strategic deworming. Then, of course, we had the macrocyclic lactones coming, which had a persistent efficacy. So they work longer, meaning that we can reduce the number of treatments, but also prolong the interval of treatment. For instance, with the longest remnant effect for moxidectin, which resulted in the 0-10 treatment shadow. And here are the persistent activities in weeks against the different the most important nematodes for the different drugs. Besides the macrocyclic lactones, and I understand in Austria this is still given a lot. There are the boluses, of course, that also protect the animals or prevent infection for a long period, so that the whole grazing season can be safely covered with the guarantee that the animals don't have a high infection level. However, we can consider now that in many cases, there are still cases, of course, when these treatment schedules are very useful and are still valid, but we see that actually they are still very seldom applied. Why? First of all, because it doesn't fit the farm management anymore. For instance, animals are put on pasture not as a single group, and then but the composition of the herd changes every week or every month. So new animals are added, or there are a lot of small groups. So it's just becoming impractical to do this kind of treatment approach. And further, there are other reasons. They are no longer recommended because they can exert a high selection pressure for resistance, because if you treat in the beginning of the grazing season, well, there is a low refugia, pasture contamination can be considerably low, and so you can select for resistance. Other reason is a changing epidemiology. As I showed, we don't often see anymore this traditional summer peak, but infections, depending on the weather circumstances of that specific year, often the infection will only occur later. So if there's no risk anyway in the beginning of the grazing season, it's little value to treat at that point, and it could be wasted energy and costs to treat in the beginning of the grazing season. And another reason is more and more attention for and concerns for effects of parasiticides on the non-target fauna. So in the end, on biodiversity and on soil health. And this is also a point that will be given more attention in the future, such as via the environment, this new cost action on this aspect. So then, if we say, okay, these are out of date, but then we should come with an alternative, because the parasites will still be there, and we believe there's the solution, or we can do more on integrated parasite control. Integrated parasite control, where we say the treatment are still important, but we need to expand our basket of options with not only the treatments, but also consider other approaches, so that can work together and can reduce also the need for treatments. And if we say other measures, what can this be? This can be clear consideration of grazing management that can often have protective effects against the parasites. This can be breeding for resilient or resistant animals that build good immunity to the infections. This can be plant-based control. This can be biological controls, which is the Dudingtonia, so the nematophagous fungi. Or this could be more use of vaccines. All have a place, and we should more think of them to use them also. And besides of the technical solutions that we can use, grazing management, anthelmintic treatments, vaccines, and so on, we think it's also important to build a community of practice. A community of practice where people that have a shared concern or a shared passion about these infections have an opportunity to learn from each other and to share experiences. And this was for a long time the missing link, I think, in making integrated parasite control a reality. But this is now what we are building with Spark. Spark, a thematic network funded by the European Commission. So we're building a community of practice on sustainable worm control in grazing ruminants, and to share experiences on on how everybody in different farms, in different regions, in different production sectors is doing it, learning from each other, but at the same time always putting a lot of emphasis still on performance and resilience of the farms, because that is in the end what we want. I'm a parasitologist, so we think a lot about the parasites and we want to control the parasites, but in the end, it's not the objective to control the parasite. The end objective is to have a resilient farm and to have sustainable production and to have performant production. That is the end goal, and good parasite control is a tool, an aid to reach that goal. And we hope we get funding for 3 years through the Commission, but of course we hope that we can keep on going that network after the 3 years. We are now halfway through, and we hope that so that we can be a self-sustaining network. But this will be work in progress, and it will be the work of everyone to make this a success and to make this a reality. So we're starting from the consortium with the partners that are displayed here. But we want to, and we are expanding the network so everybody can contribute in his own way. So for instance, we have associated partners, and we are setting also up activities in associated countries like Lithuania, Latvia, Hungary, Romania, Cyprus. And we are also welcoming associated organizations. Associated organizations are organizations that subscribe to the goals of sustainable worm control of Spark and can contribute by setting up their own activities in this field. And so this we have for the moment over 16 associated organizations as well, from different countries, even from outside of Europe. A key thing that we are doing in Spark is piloting sustainable practices. So for the moment, we have 306 pilot farms in 9 countries. In these pilot farms, they cover 6 different production systems: dairy cattle, beef cattle, sheep, dairy sheep, meat sheep, and goats. And in each of the farms, we are testing different protocols depending on the local situation and the local experiences. So a protocol can be, for instance, targeting anthelmintic treatments based on different parameters. targeted selective treatment, so selecting individual animals within the herd or within the flock for treatment, also based on the parameters that are locally suited. We're testing decision support tools like the worm-wise decision support tool. We're testing phytotherapy, so plant-based control approaches. We're testing bioactive compounds in the feed. We're testing grazing management approaches. And the idea of the piloting is the first objective is to demonstrate it. So not so much having the scientific hardcore results, but first of all is to demonstrate the feasibility and to get the farmer experience with it and farmer feedback. And also, and the second objective is indeed to analyze, to collect what are the effects on parasite infection levels, on anthelmintic use, and on the production of the cattle. If we reduce anthelmintics or we change the control approach, or can we maintain or increase productivity of the livestock? And all the results are translated in the knowledge exchange platform of Spark, where so that you can visit, and where, for instance, podcast videos or practice abstracts are published in different languages. This can all be filtered, so I also highly recommend you to go there and look to see if there is some interesting information for you to find. So if we close this question, traditional deworming routines, were we wrong? Well, maybe we were not wrong, but we need to adapt. We need to adapt to the new situation. So the traditional deworming routines, they have worked very well, but today we need different approaches because of different reasons. The changing epidemiology, the resistance, different societal expectations, and we need to adapt, because if we don't adapt, yes, we will get into bigger problems if we ignore the changes. So things are changing and things have become more variable than before. We cannot always, we have models, but models are there to understand more than to predict, because prediction will always remain very difficult, probably even with the AI that is going on now. So in the end, what we need is that we need to have more monitoring, more diagnosis to know the situation and then to act upon the situation. So which tools do we have for this purpose? And for gastrointestinal nematodes, we use this graph where we differentiate between young animals, especially first grazing season cattle, and adult animals. First grazing season cattle, it's important to use knowledge of the grazing history, knowledge of the local epidemiology. Well, it's not a technical diagnosis, a lab diagnosis, but it's very important. Already it can give you a lot of information, and often can be even enough information to define a good strategy. If we want to have more information, we can perform fecal accounts during the grazing season, or we can use weight gain indicators. So to detect the low performing cattle. At housing, we recommend the use of the serum pepsinogen assay, as it gives a good indication of abomasal infection level, and also is also kind of a morbidity parameter. Then for adults, the only monitoring tool still we consider for gastrointestinal nematodes are the use of bulk tank Milik antibodies, yes, against Osteichthyia. Now, of course, there are other indicators that you can use for TT. So this is also an old publication, but this applies also. Some are more suitable for sheep, some can be used in cattle. So but in general, we say we can use morbidity parameters, immunological parameters, biochemical like the pepsinogen or anti-helminth antibodies. For liver fluke, we could think of liver enzymes. We can have parasitological parameters, fecal egg count, or can be also antigen, like copper antigen ELISA for fasciola, could be PCR tests. And we can use production parameters. So weight gain, we talked about weight gain. We can also think about milk yield, carcass weight, and to use that to detect low-performing animals that will likely benefit from treatment. But in the use of all these indicators, I'm always asked, like, yes, but what is the threshold? Everybody wants to know the threshold. When should we treat? And when should we not treat? And when is there a problem? And when is there not a problem? But of course, and we have tried to summarize that here in this paper, to treat or not to treat. But of course, the inconvenient truth is that there is no definite threshold, and this will always remain an utopia. This is so for fecal egg counts. This is so for the Osteichthyia ELISA. This is so, I believe, for any diagnostic test. And why is this so? Because many reasons, but some of the reasons is variation in infection levels and resilience to infection. So even the same infection level in a different animal under a different management practice will lead to different production effect. So there's variation. These are living animals with so many factors: the feed, the climate, the genetics influencing the production losses, the production effects. Also, what is important is it maybe there's not we don't see an effect of the treatment on milk production, but maybe the cattle was still growing, or maybe it was fighting another disease, which because of the worms have been removed was more successful in controlling, in raising immunity against this other disease. Variation in economic situation. If you have a milk yield response of 1 kilogram per cow today, or you have it last year, well, the milk price is different, so also the effect is different, and so in some cases farmers are not making money on their milk, so then there's no point in increasing production. Then it's just point of producing the milk at the lowest cost possible. And then there is a variation in farmer characteristics. Not all farmers want the same. Some want robust animals with moderate production. Some want to get the maximum out of their animals. Some have more ecological motives. Some have strict economic motives. So it's all different. So just to say, so that then what can we do? If there's no threshold, what can we do? We can, of course, monitor, and we can establish baseline. If we regularly monitor, we understand the situation, and we can manage the situation. And this can be farm specific. So in this whole process, the veterinarian would be key, and planning and routine would be key. It's not a one-off test, and now it is, and now we do something. It's more different steps that you do regularly, at least once a year, but maybe there's 2 or 3 time points in the year where we can think about parasites or start to plan, for instance, at the beginning of the grazing season, to plan what we will do in the middle of the grazing season to check if we're on the good way, and at the end of the grazing season to see if what we did was successful and we need adjustments. So planning, routine, monitoring, implementing, and always evaluating and fine-tuning, let's say. So it's a never-ending circle, and it's something that needs to be done regularly. That is the whole point. And in this, to make this feasible, we think that a good relationship farmer vet is key. So here as an example, and I'm going to quickly look at the next slide to see what is there. Yeah, just as an example, here was another study for the interpretation, for instance, of the diagnostic test, why grazing history is so important. This was a study also conducted in Belgium, where what is being done on your farm, and what so for instance, these are all grazing management practices that could be considered to have a preventive effect. So a later turnout after 1st of June, early housing, hemoprophylaxis, mowing of the pasture, supplementary feeding. These are all measures that are expected to result in a lower infection level. But what we saw that on almost 75% of the farms, 2 preventive measures are being implemented anyway in the grazing management. So on a lot of these farms, probably there is no need for further chemoprophylaxis or for an intensive treatment schedule. So it means that it's very important to understand what's going on, so to adapt the control advice to these circumstances. And if we understand that, we saw that already easily in 20-30% of the farms we could reduce the recommended control, to reduce the number of treatments in the control advice. Here is another example of the key role of the veterinarian and how it can be very different to interpret the same diagnostic result in different situations. This was an economic analysis conducted by Mariska van der Voort, where we did efficiency analysis. So we consider, we put parasites in perspective to the feed management. So the use of concentrate, ravage, and pasture. So that, and we differentiated 3 groups of farms. The 2 farms that are close to the efficiency line, it means these are efficient farms. These farms have built up experience and they succeed in producing a lot of milk from so with a low amount of food they can produce a lot of milk. And another group were in the inefficient farms, so they need more feed to produce the same amount of milk. And this is reflected in these bars. So high amount of ravage, a high amount of pasture, and a considerable amount of concentrate. However, what we saw, despite in these farms, on average, they had also an overall high infection level, which was normal because they made high use of pasture. We did not find any correlation between ODR, so between the infection and efficiency and the production. So this suggests that in these farms, even while they are infected, it's probably not going to be the first thing to do to improve there, and it's not going to result in improved production because they have to work on other things and on their feeding management first. In other farms, they were more efficient with low use of pasture, so intensive farms with high use of concentrates, low infection levels, but still there was a high correlation with infection levels. So even if they are low in infection levels, probably these farms can benefit from worm control to get rid of the last worms, so to also achieve their last bits of efficiency gains. And the same here, they were efficient, but based on pasture use. So efficient farm use, they were at higher infection levels, but also here they could probably benefit from worm control because they already managed a lot. They were already good in their feeding management. And of course, how can we differentiate these farms? This is not easy. This needs detailed knowledge of the farm, how they work, and probably this only comes with working with these farms for years. So, meaning that for correct advice, correct interpretation, we really need the local scientists that can work closely together with the farmer to evaluate and to interpret things in the correct way. To make this a little bit easier for the vet, this is why we are working on Wormwise. Wormwise is a decision support tool where we want to simplify this process and make it more convenient for the veterinarian. And what does it involve? The process or the tool involves to collect the farm-specific management information, to collect and integrate lab diagnostic results, and combine these two factors into an advisory report. And so what does the report contain? It remains the lab results. It contains a kind of risk score, so to compare where you are in the general population. It contains a section on potential economic costs of the infection, and it contains some proposed control advices. But these control advices can always be further complemented, so the vet can type in the report and can add his own advices to the report. And this is really the aim, is to start the discussion. Even here, in the report, we cannot go into all the details, but it's a way to start the discussion with the vet, with the farmer, and then see, yes, how again this monitoring cycle year by year, and keep track of the worms. Still, this is on targeted treatment. So it's talk about the subject, targeted treatment to the high risk herds, but we are still not there to be able to give advice on which cows can we treat in the herd. And yes, research has been going on. We have been working on that also in France. They've worked a lot on that, and several factors have been evaluated. For instance, can we target treatments to the younger or older animals? Can we use fecal egg counts? Can we use the time of effective contact? Can we use production level? So target to the lower or the higher producing animals. But, well, in some, none of these effects really have ever come out as consistent, so as reliable predictors. So again, it will probably be context specific, and we need to combine parameters, and we need further research on this. Also, this is just one study. for instance, where we saw, okay, the effect on milk production of anthelmintic treatment at calving. This is in Flanders, but we saw, for instance, the effect of treatment was higher in the third or in higher lactation animals than in the first lactation animals. We saw the treatment effect was higher in animals with a medium body condition score, so not the too meager animals and not the very fat animals. So body condition score management, to have a good body condition score at time of calving, which is also a general good practice in herd management, may be a very important to reach the best production effects of treatment. Also here, we saw highest production effect in high individual milk ELISA results. However, in subsequent studies, we could not confirm this. So, meaning there are things here, but more research is needed, and I guess it's urgently needed to be able to give better advice on selective treatment within a herd. The same for liver fluke. Liver fluke, we also did a study where we showed that treatment at dry off could result in a clear benefit production effect, and also resulted in lower, at least in that study, in lower infection levels in the herd. Also here, if we go for individual treatment, we saw that indeed the production effects were mainly in the positive animals on individual milk ELISA. However, in the very high positive animals, there was also no production effect. We don't know the reason. Maybe it's because the disease is too far advanced or too chronic in these animals. We don't know. It's just an observation. So building further on this possibility of individual treatment for flucicides, this is just an example of 12 herds where we did all the individual ELISAs. All these herds are positive on bulk tank milk test, and then just to show the variation. So showing that, so the red line represents the cutoff in the test. So all the animals right from the line are the positive animals. So you can see that in some herds, almost all the animals are positive, so would need to be treated. So in this case, it would not make a lot of added value to do the individual treatment, to do the individual test. But in other herds, for instance, this herd, you see that there's actually the majority of the animals is negative, so would not need treatment. And so in these herds, it would be very beneficial to do the individual testing and then to only treat the positive animals. So coming to the end, is there more than economics? Because yes, we treat because we want to keep worms low, but especially we treat because we want to maintain the productivity and the welfare of the animals. But is it all about productivity? No, of course not. And we are living in economic times where everything turns about economics. All our lives seems to be dictated by that, and we are slaves of the economy. But it's clear that there's more than economy. Yes, we did some economic cost studies where we show that these infections really remain important, and we need to become better in mitigating these costs, because these costs are in the same magnitude as the cost of big viral disease outbreaks. Let's say if we have every 10 years an outbreak of FMD, but in these 10 years, every year we have the cost of helminth infections. Well, the costs of helminth infections are the same or even higher than the costs of FMD, of blue tongue. So it is important to continue give attention to these diseases. We estimated that they represent about 3% of the total output value of the ruminant sector in the EU. Also, thanks to Barbara, we were able to do some estimations for Austria, where we estimated that the annual cost in Austria was about 15 million in dairy cattle and 12 million in beef cattle. These costs are mainly constituted of production losses, and 6% at that time we estimated of these production losses costs are linked with anthelmintic resistance. So what is it? Of course, this is population level. If we translate this to the farmer, what this could mean on farm level, well, again, depending on infection level and which parasites, and the costs typically range between 30 to 150 euro per cow per year on a farm in Europe. I think I covered this one, meaning that there's so many factors that will affect the economic benefit on the farm. The most important factor is the milk price, because yes, this is the main output of a dairy farm. So if the milk price is good, you will see that farmers are more interested to do parasite control. If the milk price is low, they will cut costs on that, and that makes perfect sense. But there's also other factors. The herd size, we need to take into account the cost of the treatment and the advice. We need to take into account farmer goals, and so on. And this will all affect the end economic benefit to the farmer of a certain control strategy. But then making the introduction to the next talk, is it all economics? Well, clearly it's not all economics. It's the farmer decision. Our economics is very important, but probably more important are other factors, social, psychological factors. Is the identity of the farmer, is the traditions in which he has been working, is the beliefs, is the social norms, is the feasibility of the approaches. And so this is very important to consider if we want to give advice and we want to know how to give advice on sustainable worm control. So wrapping up, and some quick conclusions from this presentation. It's clear that epidemiology and society have changed and require new sustainable control approaches. These changes cannot always be predicted, so monitoring and diagnosis will be more important than ever. A key to change will be to build this community of practice. It's not top-down approach, but it should be building community of practice where also bottom-up approaches get their chance, and where we have a framework, a place to share experiences and also to motivate each other to change. And in this process, the veterinarian will have always a key role, and also needs to take up also the role of the coach, but needs to be supported with good tools, good anthelmintics, good diagnostics, good decision support, and good communication tools. And with that, I think we can make sustainable worm control a reality, and we can move forward. With that, you can find the presentation will be shared. You can always join the, let's say, community of practice and spark on the social media via these QR codes. And with that, I also want to thank you and to end with this nice picture I took in my holiday in Austria 2 weeks ago. Thank you very much.